one of the things that we've had to talk about is actual skills out there. And boy, where to go with this, because I think one of the themes that we've heard for the last 6 months is just how hard it is to actually get people to get jobs in hospitality. And you're in this incredible period of staffing shortages, but at the same time, we want to get better and better quality staff. We need to train them, and we need to have a mindset shift. So, Virginia, can we start with you? How do you go about doing that? And tell us a little bit about your work with WTTC.
Absolutely, Scott, and thank you so much, and great to see everyone here. So I think you've just hit the nail in the head when you said staff shortages, because in 2020 globally we saw the loss of 62 million jobs, and of course this is a figure that at WTTC we have been putting out there, because as we know, our sector was very badly hit, more than any other sector across the economy. And so 62 million livelihoods and 62 million people walked away of the sector. And as we're seeing this recovery, and of course we're pleased to see flights back full again, and people traveling again as we are today, but the challenge is there is a huge imbalance between labor supply and demand. So there are a lot of jobs out there, and the people are not there to fill in these jobs. So I think before we talk about skills, we need to really think as an industry, how are we going to attract these people? How are we going to bring them back to the market? And of course, how are we going to train them to continue providing the very relevant experience that our sector does? So I think that's the real critical issue that we're facing as a sector globally.
Perfect. Zach, one of the things that we were chatting about very briefly in the green room before us was just the shift in some of the hiring that has to be done. And it's not just about sustainability, it's about diversity, it's about inclusion. Tell us a little bit about Journey Mexico and what your mindset is out there as you're not just looking to hire, but train people.
Sure. Thank you, Scott, and nice to be here with you guys as well and to see everyone. No, I think we've always been an organization that understood that our most important resource is the human resource. And with that goal of attracting, retaining the best possible talent, we've always attempted to really focus on that above all else. So it was interesting in preparing for this panel. My team put together some stats, and we have over 60% of our staff is female, including C-level and director level and leadership. Over half of our staff identifies as LGBT+. So we were doing these things before it was necessarily popular or even part of the dialogue. I think, though, what we're learning is that it's important to formalize these things. It has to become part of the DNA of all of our organizations, and in formalizing, it could be as simple as inserting language into your policies or articulating things that you're doing naturally, but really making, whether it's inclusion, diversity, accessibility, the environment, communities, these things have to become central factors in the decision-making processes. So specifically with talent, including that language in our hiring policies and also the promotion of positions as they become available.
Is this something that is macro, you need it written in policy, government needs it written in policy, or is it more of a soft touch every day where it's reinforced with?
Yes, on all the different levels, right? It's from top to bottom, it's from the micro to the macro. I think one of the things that I was talking about briefly with John last night about accessibility is, these are very different challenges in the developed world versus the developing world. And simple infrastructure investments in terms of ramps, elevators, things that you've experienced on your travel here, John. I mean, we need it from the very highest levels all the way down to the micro levels of businesses and how we go about creating inclusivity and accessibility and all these other issues.
which segues to John. Hi, John. John and I were chatting out at the pool yesterday, and for those who don't follow us at the Points Guy, one of the things that we do are a lot of hotel reviews. Until recently, we did not look at accessibility. It was a shortcoming that we had, and about 2 years ago, we had a moment where we realized this and really started to look at, accessibility, whether it's room type, in public facilities, and a lot of that infrastructure. But John, you and I were chatting yesterday, and it's not just about infrastructure. It's about skills and training for the staff. So tell us a little bit about what you do with Accessible Travel Solutions and how that actually applies to the employees in the business.
Sure, it's great to be here, Scott. There's been existing research that's gone back 20 years. You and WTO did some of it, Expedia did some of it, Amadeus and others. And there's three things that disabled travelers need that comes up in the research again and again. So the first is that accessibility, it's be accessible. It actually needs ramps and elevators and wide doors and properly height on beds and all these things. A website that's can be read by a screen reader, so a blind person can use it. There's all these things. So there's be accessible. Then for anything that's not truly universally accessible, it does require a human touch, and it requires customer service and somebody to actually help out. And so, I would love if I checked in at a hotel that they said, "Hey, would you like us to remove the desk chair from the room? Because I don't need it, and it's just something that gets in my way." And then the housekeeping staff, they put the handheld shower nozzle back out of reach every day, every hotel I've ever been in. And so there's a training component also. And the last one that is really missed often is the accessibility information. So as a disabled traveler, and I've planned probably thousands of trips and my team have planned thousands of trips for people with disabilities, a disabled person doesn't want to leave the comfort of their home unless they gain a certain amount of trust that they're going to have a good experience and they're not going to have a bad experience. And so the question is, how do you gain that trust? And one of the absolutely key components is publishing transparent, accurate, clear accessibility information. So, when I checked in at a recent hotel, it said it had a roll-in shower and there was a lip like this, because I didn't see a photograph of it. And so those three components are really, I think, what we've seen from a lot of experience that the disabled traveler needs.
If there were 2 or 3 things that every travel provider could do for you ahead of a trip, photos, what would you actually recommend to folks who are listening?
Yeah, I think in general it's, my message is be proactive rather than reactive. If you wait until the disabled traveler shows up and says, "Hey, I have a disability, these are the things I think I need," they don't really know because they've never been to that place. If you're acting from a reactive standpoint, it's time consuming, it's costly, it's risky. And so the better approach is to be proactive, to actually evaluate your accessibility of your physical destination, if you're a hotel or an attraction or a cruise ship, or your processes. So can somebody go onto your website, find the accessibility information, and make an accessible booking? My recent experience is I made a booking for a hotel room. I couldn't get an accessible room, and so I had to have a 34-minute phone call to try to get the accessible room. They said it was guaranteed, and I showed up, and they said they had no more accessible rooms left. And so this is sort of, it's best, don't wait for the disabled person to show up and try to voice what they need. They might not even know, really, and so, be more proactive.
Virginia, let's talk a little bit about the relationship with regulators. What can the industry do to work better with them to ensure that there are these skill sets out there? And what's that relationship like right now? I know it's very wide because every country has different rules, different regulations, but what is that relationship, and where do groups like WTTC come into play in maybe making that a little easier?
I think think, first of all, as an industry, we need, and both public and private sector really, we need to do a better job at the sort of the perception of our industry as an employer, right? So I was talking earlier about the jobs that need to come back to our sector. And overall, our jobs are not perceived like very high skilled. And I think that is a challenge that we need to address. How are we perceived as an employer? This is an industry that provides opportunities, that provides mobility, that employs minorities, and that transforms communities, as we've been hearing all along the previous sessions. So more needs to be done, and we need to address that collectively. Now, there has been some progress made, and of course, I mean, we are very pleased to have so many of our members here that are really, just like both my co-panelists here, that are making really real tangible steps in terms of addressing this. But a lot more needs to be done. Like, one thing is to raise awareness, and I think as this pandemic evolved, we know that sustainability really gained momentum, and it's not just at the policy level, it's also at the customer level. We are all now a lot more conscious about when we travel, making sure that we're having the right impact. So that is already there, but that needs to be sort of coupled with the policies and with real tangible action.
If I can just add on that, one of the things that we have learned as we've gone on is just how important the government role is in terms of incentivizing and facilitating really good relationships between employers and employees. So when we started our business 20-odd years ago, we were told that the way you do it is, you kind of outsource or use secondary entities to assume the liability of labor, right? And we said, that sounds really strange, that we're telling these people they're our most important asset, and yet they look you in the eye and they say, well, why don't I work for you then, right? So we changed that over time to, what we did perceive it, maybe there's a risk by contracting them directly, but what we found over time, and it's much like most of this conversation about sustainability, is in the long term, the reduction in turnover, the loyalty, and the long-term relationship with these people, which become your family, right? Your work family, ends up in much better long-term returns. So I think that the government role in evolving these policies that are often antiquated and based on, vestiges of the past, right, where there were different relationships between labor and employers, I think the government could play a really good role in pushing on that and bringing those policies into the future.
How do you get that message out to people who are looking for jobs? I mean, I know it's a tough job market, as we've talked about, but at the same point, there is looking forward to the future. Maybe they're not going to work for you this year, but next year, the year after, they could. What does the industry need to do to get that message out there about that mobility, Virginia, that you talked about in the industry?
I mean, I think if you look even more than what do you do, to attracting talent, I think if we look at the pandemic and how we behave towards our teams, it's a great microcosm and a great case study, because what in our case, what we did is we really leaned in strengthening culture and in communicating and in being transparent and being vulnerable, and showing that it's not just, obviously the first answer is show me the money, right? How do you attract staff? How do you make sure that they're happy working for you? Pay them well, sure, but there's a lot more than just money in their compensation and in their job satisfaction. And I think in the pandemic, being vulnerable, reaching out, flattening, it's no more like boss and employee, it's that we're in it together. How do we get through this together? How do we build things together? How do we succeed together? How do we fail together? How do we face challenges together? I think that's a huge piece, that cultural shift. And I think it's integral in everything we're talking about, is really opening up that relationship from the very, very top all the way down to the entry-level positions. That doesn't mean that at every table there's a seat for everybody, but it means creating channels so that there is stakeholder representation, there is open and fluid communication, and being available and accessible in a more figurative sense to everybody in your organization.
when people are making choices about vacations, they often will ask, am I going to be comfortable here? And that is often reflected on, do they relate with the staff? Does the staff relate to them? Are they treated with respect? So as you look out at sort of some of the hiring decisions, some of the training, and what we're doing as an industry, what could we be doing better? Virginia?
I mean, there's, again, a lot that can be done, and I think the first thing we need to be doing when we talk about inclusion is really understanding these underrepresented minorities or marginalized groups, right? So, I mean, it is incredibly broad, and John hopefully will agree with this. When we talk about inclusion, I mean, there's so many different, obviously, people with disabilities and visual impairment and hearing impairment and neurodiversity and so many. It's about 15 different identities that I think experts talk about. And so as a traveler, how are we, and as a business operator, how are we going to understand these groups? We need to listen to them. So I think integrating these people into the conversation is critical. And we're seeing a lot of our members doing this and having very specific targets and really trying to think. I think some of these groups will, the first thing that we'll think is, am I going to be safe when I travel? And I think that is critical. And so, but it's very difficult to relate to that without listening. So I think that is very important. And again, many destinations are already making a lot of progress on this, integrating these different diverse situations to really be able to cater to them appropriately.
John, I want to come back to something you said a few minutes ago, which is there's a choice, and the choice is all too often staying home, where you know you have everything you need, versus getting out there and seeing the world, which I think everyone in this room would agree is a great thing. What is the market like right now for accessible travel? How big is it, and what are some of the challenges?
Yeah, I could say it's huge and it's underserved and it's relatively untapped in a lot of ways. There's 1 billion people with disabilities in the world. It makes up about 20% of most source markets in developed countries. And it's exactly that. It is, how do you gain that consumer trust? And once somebody has some bad experiences, they sort of decide, okay, well, instead of doing this trip abroad to go see a city or go to a beach, I'm just going to go to the lake house nearby. And so they're not really in the travel industry, maybe per se. And so there's still a lot to be done to get that population off the sideline and into the travel industry. And it's good for all of us in here as business. Part of businesses and destinations to tap into this market. There's some other benefits, not just monetarily and not just inclusion, but people with disabilities tend to be senior. They tend to not have kids that are school-aged, and so they travel in off seasons and they travel midweek, and they spread out their dollars in off-peak seasons. And so if we're talking about sustainability, it connects to that as well.
Okay. And besides actual training, how can people get expertise in what they should be doing for the accessible traveler?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've seen a lot of times training is focused on the customer-facing staff. That's where, okay, the housekeeping staff, the front desk staff, the dining staff. But really, it's also needed at the executive level, just to understand the needs of disabled travelers. I thought when I started my company that as a wheelchair user, I understood what everybody needs, disabled travelers need. And I realized over the years that I don't. And every year I realize it even more. With mobility, blind, hearing, cognitive sensory, allergies. And so there's still quite a lot that I've learned. There's been a ton of research written. There's hundreds of pages out there on what needs to be done. The challenge is on the implementation, to actually take hundreds of pages of accessibility guidelines and laws and actually implement it. And so I think executive education is a key component of that. Also, not just the training, but also tools and processes to actually translate that into implementation.
So I want to bring this a little bit down to reality from the macro level into the micro. What's one example that each of you has seen where there's been success? Something that, whether it's a training or individual reaction or just someone in the industry who you've met who's done this really well, and what can we all learn from that? Have it?
Sure. I mean, I think we've seen great results and a lot of fulfilling work in terms of working with local communities, in terms of sustainability, environment, community issues. We began about 10 years ago creating what we then called a sustainability portfolio of experiences, right? And they varied by different destination. In Mexico City, we did things with women's issues. In the Riviera Maya, with coral reefs, and the environment and social issues. And we didn't actually market them as a sustainability portfolio, but we offered them to families and other guests that were looking for volunteer experiences. And this is all new. These are new demands that are coming into the market, which I'm incredibly pleased to see. But the point is, and addressing your question, we went out and we had to not just educate the communities themselves and work with them to kind of think about what feels right and not stilted and not fake, but we had to work all the way through the value chain from our own staff actually explaining, why are we doing this? What is this, right? The communities, the customer, the guest, all the way through it, and getting that stakeholder input, adjusting these experiences, and ultimately coming out with experiences that are highlights and we get incredible feedback from. So it's a long and slow process, and I think we all understand we're here for the long term, and this is not a tomorrow solution, but we've had really great results, very fulfilling experiences with that.
Virginia?
Well, there are loads of examples of the big companies, obviously. I mean, Hilton, for example, or even our member Jiran Chapur, who was on the stage earlier. They're doing incredible training programs, integrating people, trying to do it very efficiently. And ultimately, I mean, we're an industry of people. That no matter how much technology advances, we're always going to need that warm hospitality like the one we're experiencing here in San Juan. But I think what we're also seeing is how the industry once again is evolving and adapting. So we're starting to rethink some of these business models. There are some jobs within hospitality that will never change because we will always need that warmth and that service. But we're rethinking some of those models. So we're seeing some examples, for example, in the US, where we're looking at potentially part-time work and where we're becoming a bit more flexible in terms of the offer and in terms of these jobs. And so again, we're rethinking these models and we're adapting as things evolve and as the world has evolved and trying to integrate that flexibility that is happening elsewhere in the economy into our business models.
Great. John, an example?
Yeah. In terms of accessible travel, the ones that are doing the best are the specialists. So there's, and you probably wouldn't know them, but there's accessible travel agents out there, there's accessible tour operators, and this is what they do full time, and they've sort of built this their own distribution network that's sort of apart from the mainstream travel industry, and so that's where a lot of disabled people turn to, is these specialists, and they blog and they have Instagram and Facebook and are really well known. So they tend to really do a fairly comprehensive job. But if you're talking about a big company that I needed to mention, I'll say that Royal Caribbean has an Autism on the Seas program that has really resulted in a lot more bookings. It's been growing. Their passenger count, particularly families with autistic children, has been growing, and so that effort has really paid off for them.
Great. I know we could probably talk about this for hours, but we're running out of time, so I want to do a quick lightning round with everyone of just, we just finished discussing investing in the industry, but there are financial costs here. What are the hurdles that we have in getting across just a better skill set across the industry?
I don't know if this is a hurdle, and from conversations I've had so far here, I think we're all grappling a bit with this if we can say it, post-pandemic world, but everyone wants to talk about how much success and efficiencies we've gained with technology, and we've also done that, implementing new systems, working virtually, and now grappling with a hybrid system, right, where people are working from home, people are working in the office, and most of our staff really pushed back. You know, our big plan as we reopened offices was, okay, it's going to be 3 days a week, and we discussed for weeks, months amongst our executive staff. I know I wanted 4 days a week, and somebody said 1 day a week, and so we settled on 3 days a week. When we went to the team with it, they unanimously rebelled. You know, they said, how about no days a week, right? So we ended up settling on 1 day a week, all right? We just said, you know what, the important thing is just get them in there, and they're going to start to remember that there's positive things here. Well, where I'm getting to is, I think it was fine when we had all of our veterans, you know, right, coming out of the worst of it. We were down to our core team, right, our veterans of people who really knew the company and had the company culture. But as we're all scaling up again, and we're rehiring and skilling up again, I think that's where we're seeing real challenges. And how do you train people virtually? You know, like that culture and that feeling of being together, that's where I think the investments of, we are a people business, right?
We're having the same problems
right?
in my company, exactly. Virginia?
Yeah.
I think there's a level of investment that is required as well into all of this. I mean, Zach sort of covered it, but I think, you know, things are evolving, customer choices are evolving, and technology is evolving. So in order for us to upskill a workforce, I mean, there is some elements of investment that need to go there. Policies need to be in place as well. There's obviously a role that governments play in all of this. So I think it is really about evolving and adapting to the new realities, as we were saying, and for everyone to really focus on that.
And John, you get the final word.
Yeah, I'll say that, you know, here's a question. When was the last time that you saw a commercial, print or ad, print or online, that says, hey, we're accessible, come book with us, you know, this is why we're accessible, come book with us? Well, there's not a whole lot of that out there, and so I would say that, yes, there is an investment, but where else are you going to get into a space that's not, you know, not really served? It's relatively untapped, and so I think that's, you know, that's the answer. It's a good investment.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all the time. Great conversation. Appreciate it.